One wish, Willow. You only get one wish. I wish Nikki Freeman loved me more than anyone in the entire world.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to my first video essay that I've been meaning to do for quite a while. A little different from the content I usually upload, but I hope you guys enjoy. Because the movie we're covering today is the new horror flick Obsession, directed by Curry Barker. And for anyone who hasn't watched it, I strongly suggest you guys check it out, because we're about to tread onto some major spoiler territory. It's a great horror film that explores interpersonal relationships and the complexities of love, as well as many other things we'll dive into. You have been warned, and without further ado, let's get right into it. What initially starts off as a seemingly superstitious wish spirals into something much darker. It could be argued that Bear had no ill intention of completely overriding Nikki's autonomy, and while it may be true at the start of the film with how reluctant Bear was with Nikki's advances, he does eventually learn of the wish's influence and how it completely ruins Nikki's life. These are not the attributes of a man with a strong sense of intellectual honesty, but of an insecure man who is invasive and demands affection even if it comes at the expense of his partner's freedom. We first catch a glimpse of this during the diner scene when Bear confronts Nikki about her dad.
Nikki,
Yeah?
does your dad really have cancer?
No.
After Bear learns that Nikki lied about her dad's deteriorating health, he instead reacts negligently and has sexual intercourse with her, which is more like sexual assault. Instead of trying to face the reality of his newfound situation, he becomes fixated on exploiting her and continues to add on to her suffering despite being given many chances to amend his mistake. This scene has a much darker take in the screenplay. His response reveals a disregard for truth, showing a readiness to ignore darker realities for affection, hinting at a deeply flawed person. Now, this clearly tells us that Bear deliberately chooses to ignore the fact that the Nikki he's dating is nothing more than a perversion of the friend he once knew. One thing that's important to note is how deeply flawed the dynamic between the entire friend group was. Their lack of transparency with one another causes a strain in their interpersonal relationships, especially between Bear and Ian. Sarah is a bit more complicated, but this is something we'll get into later. This is important because it sets the foundation for the chain of tragedy that transpires. Ian is an important figure because he indirectly facilitated the string of disasters Bear caused with his wish. His dishonesty with Bear regarding his previous hookups with Nikki, his omission of trivia night that Bear only learned through Sarah, can all be indications of Ian's potential jealousy for Bear's new relationship. What further fuels the absence of truth between Bear and Ian is when Ian learns through Sarah that Nikki only viewed Bear as a younger brother. Now, because Ian was known to be previously intimate with Nikki, this information may have incentivized him to undermine the relationship. Instead of divulging the truth to Bear, Ian instead tries to compel him to break up with Nikki because, to quote him, "It kind of looks like Nikki's going through something, and it kind of looks like you're taking advantage of the situation." Now, although it's true that Bear is taking advantage of Nikki, Ian could only be proposing this because of his discomfort with Nikki moving on from him, which could also influence the propagation of lies that persist between him and Bear, although their friendship was never built on honesty. Bear's dishonesty is also detrimental since he doesn't open up about the one wish Willow to Ian until Sarah gets murdered by Nikki, which brings me to my next point. Sarah was a victim to the group's half-truths, which unfortunately led to her demise. Throughout the story, we learn that Sarah has a crush on Bear and Nikki affirms it at the start of the film. Through Sarah's own perspective, knowing of Ian's hookups, she determines that Nikki's only dating Bear to get back at Ian, which further leads her to the conclusion that Nikki was manipulative. Now, obviously, we know this isn't true, because Nikki was under the influence of Bear's wish, but Sarah is oblivious to the fact. Her suspicions are reinforced when exposed to Nikki's behavior during trivia night. This scene is imperative, because before the wish happened, Nikki confessed to Sarah that she only viewed Bear as a friend, or more importantly, a little brother, and we'll circle back to that later on in the video. The only conclusion Sarah would logically draw from Nikki's comment and her aberrant behavior during trivia night is that she was using Bear as part of some larger scheme. It's why in the car scene, Sarah asserts that Nikki is taking advantage of Bear. Now again, it's important to reiterate that this is Sarah's perspective, as she was not exposed to the full reality of Bear's relationship. Her obliviousness only grew because of the information exchange between her and Ian. All this being said, Sarah's ignorance of the situation does not absolve her of responsibility for her own actions. Pursuing a relationship with Bear while knowing he was with Nikki is not a sign of acting in good faith. Her indifference towards Nikki is further reflected in how little concern she demonstrates for Nikki's self-harm and her mental degradation. Throughout the story, we see how it's the same lack of transparency that ends up hurting their friendships. Almost the fear of rejection drives people to take impulsive measures to secure what they feel entitled to, like we see with Bear. Because if he had simply worked up the nerve to tell Nikki how he felt, he wouldn't have had to make the wish. The movie makes it pretty clear that Bear is the one accountable for everything, as his greatest evil wasn't just robbing Nikki of her agency, but rather his indifference to her suffering that truly made him irredeemable. And this is evident through the countless windows of opportunities Bear receives to rectify his mistakes, but as we've learned, he deliberately chooses not to. And one out of the many scenes that is a testament to this is when he tries to dial the wish hotline, but he doesn't immediately file to cancel the wish. Instead, he attempts to alter it.
It's okay to keep the... I just want to know if I can, like, alter it a little.
I'm sorry, we don't really do that.
No?
The real Nikki is stuck in some purgatory hell screaming in agony, at least alluding to the phone call, which is never further elaborated on, and I think it makes the situation even more tragic. Even when learning his wish was granted while being aware of the moral repercussions, he still acted selfishly and tried to alter the wish to better accommodate himself. Which is ironic, because even through the accommodations that entity Nikki tried to deliver with her endless affection, it's made apparent that Bear never fully committed to his own wish. He was more entranced by the idea of a relationship with Nikki than actually loving her for the person she is. This is proven by Bear's shallow attempts to put in any actual effort into the relationship. And it's made worse by Bear's lack of empathy towards Nikki whenever presented with that same opportunity to do the right thing. One chilling scene which exemplifies this is when Nikki pleads with Bear to end her life. According to the screenplay, a faint whisper, "Bear, she's sleeping, it's me." Are you, Nikki? Shh, please don't wake her. Kill me, Bear. What would be so bad? What's so bad about being with me? I've never been with you, Bear. This is when the mask finally starts to slip, and the nice guy trope starts to fall apart, because it's a defining moment of Bear's character. Where most people would have reflected on their actions, he responds indifferently, almost as if he's too proud to confront himself with the truth of who he is. This obviously makes him a coward, and it only reinforces that idea that he doesn't care about anyone but himself. Instead of honoring Nikki's request, he uses this chance to prioritize his own selfish desire, or in this case, his obsession, rather than acknowledging how it came at the expense of Nikki's freedom. Bear's behavior throughout this film is nothing short of predatory, especially with the dynamic he and Wish Nikki share. The Hansel and Gretel poem is a clear example of that, where Wish Nikki recites a poem that fabricates an incestuous twist on the iconic Brothers Grimm tale of Hansel and Gretel. It reflects the potential sibling dynamic Bear and Nikki had at the start of the film, which leads us to the implication that the entity knew of this and exploited it to draw out Bear's guilt. It may have also been a cry for help, since we've seen Nikki constantly break through, assuming she was always alert of what Bear was consciously doing to her and what led to her self-harm at the party. He talks down to her almost like she's his pet, and it's tragic, because I also don't think Wish Nikki knew any better. At the end of the day, she was born from a wish, and she tried to carry out what she was created for. I believe she always tried to adjust her behavior according to the scale of Bear's feelings, or in this case, his obsession. Bear understood this, but still tried to make the relationship work, making him more complicit. The greatest piece of irony for Bear is the tiger's eye he's gifted during the diner scene. The tiger's eye, which previously belonged to Nikki, is supposed to be representative of strength, courage, and willpower. These are all traits Bear obviously lacks, and he never musters up the bravery the tiger's eye represents. It's made clear by the end of the film when he tries to commit suicide with his handgun. He sets the tiger eye aside, which corresponds with the lack of initiative he always had. It took all of his friends getting killed for him to finally reach this resolution, but I personally don't take it as a sacrifice from him, because sacrifice would indicate that you give a piece of yourself up to ensure a greater outcome for someone else. It's not the case with Bear when he hesitates to shoot himself. Even in his final moments, he doesn't possess the constitution for suicide to save Nikki. He couldn't commit to his suicide, just how he couldn't commit to his wish. He resorts to a more docile route and decides to take pills that he later overdoses on, which is indicative of how he could never measure up to the man he needed to be. In the end, he only wanted to spare himself from the consequences of his own actions, and from Nikki. Now, diving into what could have motivated Bear to make the wish in the first place. From what little background information we can infer on, we know that Bear lived by himself in a house recently bequeathed to him by his late grandmother. He doesn't seem to have a broad social network of friends since he's closest with Nikki given their grade school background. With his loneliness and desire for affection, any ounce of kindness from Nikki was romanticized by Bear given his social ineptitude. This is what graduates into the obsession Bear develops for Nikki later on. The tragedy is that Bear only sought guarantees that wouldn't bruise his confidence. The One-Wish Willow is not innately cursed, but rather serves as an instrumental means for Bear's goal. His purchase of the Willow Stick is a subtle testament to how little he thought of Nikki when he initially tried to buy her a gift at the store. A thoughtful gift like a crystal necklace to replace the one she lost. To take a risk that could result in rejection only festers his insecurities and pushes him to make that same wish. This is a cautionary tale about how that same insecurity can graduate into something much darker if left unchecked. Bear is a man who's infatuated with the idea of a relationship and only romanticizes the desirable aspects rather than accepting the complexities that go into them. He never became vulnerable with Nikki, which could have served as a true connection. To confront these feelings would be to self-actualize in the social sense and prevent an emotional stunt like we see with Bear. The lack of reciprocation we see in this dark and twisted relationship is what separates a romance from a love story. If you guys enjoyed this video, please feel free to comment, like, and share. And depending on the reception this video gets, maybe I'll make another one. Maybe on the backrooms, who knows. But until then, everyone have a blessed day, and thanks for watching.